How to Smoke Out a Rat. A Rogue Lineage short story written and narrated by myself. Get comfortable, get some snacks, and please enjoy the misadventures of a certain misfit orphan. Chapter 1. Sylvester. It isn't an easy life growing up as an orphan. It's a tragedy, but you won't find sympathy from anyone. After all, there's hundreds just like you. It's a common occurrence to see a short brat scurrying around with a fire or an emptiness in their eyes. Once in a million, though, a mother has lost her child in a horrific accident. Bless her poor soul. She'll sweep up the smallest she can carry, and you'll never see them on the streets again. The rest of us, though, are either dead or damn good at something. It's an unspoken rule here in the sandstone sheltered markets of Sentinel that if you want a less than savory job done well, and for dirt cheap, you buy from an orphan. Not some youngling, but one of the older, teenaged orphans with a deadpan expression who can read the job right off of your lips before you utter the breath to speak. In a situation like ours, you find yourself a skill, and you learn quickly. You're either selling to somebody, or you learn how to take silver out of pockets, soft as a feather, because there's truly nowhere else to go. Either you travel the blazing desert of the Sea of Dust to find shelter elsewhere, or you travel across the Cardinal Crossing over the Great Lake. Some orphans head towards the bridge and they never return. I've heard stories that it's far more brutal out there, and you're likely going to be mugged and killed out past the crossing. The Royal Woods sounds like a place for massacre, but that won't stop me once I have everything I need to get the hell out of here. For me, pickpocketing became an art and lifestyle. Most pay little mind to a dirty, ashen child until they slip away into the shadows with your earning. You can tell the Sentinel market regulars from those who are just passing by or the rich who want to demonstrate their wealth to the common folk. The latter are the easiest to pick. Regulars learn to hide their silver or keep it in places very difficult to steal from. I learned early that I need to have two faces. One where I simply am another shopper, and one where I am the pickpocket. I've gone through a fair amount of disguises over my years, some close calls where I've even been recognized. However, the disguises become almost pointless when your donor can't feel a thing. However, nothing beats the disguise of a Madrasian shifter, and I have the displeasure of my rival being one. Some of my earlier memories was of befriending a fellow orphan named Sylvester. He told me that, in fact, one of his parents were alive, but he was a shady Madrasian dark market dealer. A dramatic affair with one of his many love interests, which resulted in an undesired child. It isn't an uncommon story here in Sentinel. Nonetheless, Sylvester and I challenged each other. Who could make it out of this dumpster the fastest? Of course, the bastard's son had the upper hand, and even back then I knew it. Still, I think I have far more refined talents than he does. It's the busiest time of the month. Everyone is buying smoked meats, breads, and some other non-perishables for the coming weeks. Among the regulars, I noticed some fresh faces in the market, and then I spotted him. A well-dressed man who looked very odd to me. Unlike the typical folk who stepped in here, even with the various hair colors and skin tones, he had a light lavender skin and silvery gray hair. I was shocked at how strange he looked. Even with all the different types of people who found their way into Sentinel, all shared some kind of likeness to one another. Despite the varying shades of skin tone and hair colors, he was completely new. He was far more vibrant.
That's a wind,
a voice from behind me whispered. I recognized the soft, alluring tone instantly. Sylvester. I hissed back at him as I spun around to face the shadows. Sylvester was not in his usual form. Instead, he was taking the form of someone I did not recognize. A well-kept little Castellan girl, but she wore the rags that Sylvester typically wore. I assumed that the real version of her had been to the market with one of the rich folk. He had gotten quite good into shifting into people, but he still couldn't change his voice or his clothing. His big blue eyes seemed to glow from within the shadows of the pillar I was hiding behind. What's he doing out here? Don't they live up in their weird floating city? I asked rhetorically. I didn't expect Sylvester to really know the answer to that. He shrugged, and so I turned back to face the crowd. The wind had disappeared from sight, but I knew Sylvester had been facing the crowd. He likely had seen where he had gone. The bastard probably had been here to distract me so that he could pickpocket him with his ridiculous little girly disguise. I turned to glare at him, but Sylvester had already gone. I clenched my fists, slightly enraged. Usually Sylvester never sabotaged me like this. I figured we had a silent agreement to fight fairly, but I suppose I had been naive to believe a Madrasian at all. I stepped into the crowd, my eyes darting about as I tried to locate my prized target for pickpocketing. Seconds started to pass as I pushed through people. Seconds turned into minutes, and I began to worry. Sylvester surely knew where the wind was and was likely to make his move now. I cursed under my breath in anger, and suddenly I saw the same Castellan girl standing sheepishly near the meat stand, Dorgan and Dorgan's. She stood underneath one of the torches looking around with what I could almost believe to be fear in her eyes. I knew right away that this was Sylvester. I stormed over to him. I was furious. You distracted me so that you could do it, didn't you? I snarled under my breath as I slammed my fist against the wall near his head. Sylvester shrunk under me. I felt pain erupt in my knuckles as I hit the hard stone, but I didn't budge.
Obviously, there isn't anything against that stupid.
He rolled his eyes at me.
You should give up for today. There's nothing else out here worth picking.
I'm not falling for such an obvious lie. I spat at him as I lowered my hand, glancing at it. I had broken the skin over my knuckles and blood trickled out from the wound. I took a deep breath and sucked up with the pain, noting that I probably shouldn't do that. There was no point in trying to fight Sylvester for the money he had stolen, since I would be arrested. I figured I would try to get some money, since a busy time like this wouldn't come back for many weeks. I needed to be able to pay for food, and I suppose now bandages. I stepped away from him and back into the crowd, scanning those that passed me for anyone who left their silver within my reach. In the distance, I spotted it. Somebody was browsing for some custom-made daggers at a shop, and their silver pouch was just on the counter. If I kept my head down and swiped it, I could keep myself fed until the next month. I pulled my hood over my very obvious red hair as I scooted over, pretending to eye the daggers myself. I wandered over with my head slightly up as I looked at the daggers. I was about to make my move when somebody grabbed my arm and yanked me away. I thought it might be Sylvester trying to ruin my score yet again, so I opened my mouth to retort when I saw the face staring at me. The wind was looking at me dead in the eyes, and we both stared in silence. You're under arrest, brat. He spoke firmly as he started to drag me along. I deadpanned for a moment in confusion. I hadn't picked anyone today. He hadn't been here before. At least, that's what I thought. Had he been here the other day and seen me pickpocketing people? Had he waited for me to come back? For what? I stammered as I struggled to pull him off of my arm, but his grip was tight and firm. Millions of thoughts ran through my head. Was he a guard? Did he know I was going to pickpocket him? For stealing my silver and running away. You didn't think I saw that red head of yours, kid? His tone was cold and bitter. His gaze seemed annoyed, and worst of all, he thought I was stupid. He had that disdainful look in his eyes that you give to people who say stupid things. I never took anything from you! You're crazy! I snarled back at him and struggled more. I don't even have your silver pouch on me! I rolled my eyes and realized I probably shouldn't have been so specific, especially since I was absolutely stalking him in order to take his money. I can see through your lies, kid. I saw you take it and bolt. You probably handed it over to that Castellan friend of yours. The Vin sighed as he let go of my arm and looked me up and down, verifying that I didn't have his money. When he mentioned Sylvester, though, things began to click in my head. Had Sylvester shifted into me, stolen from the Vind and ran? Was that why he looked so nervous when I found him? I was simply in shock. I knew Sylvester was one hell of a trickster, but I never thought that he would do something this far, like framing me. It was a shifter! I protested, rubbing my arm and glaring up at him. There was a Madrasian shifted into me. Don't be fooled by that bastard! The Vin looked skeptical of my story and laughed. Oh, I don't think so, little thief. He shook his head. You'll regret messing with me. I've heard that the guards here aren't very friendly. He began to drag me along with him, but since I couldn't get his hand off me, I had to either walk along with him or he'd probably just drag me along the rough sandy floor. And that was not an experience I was thrilled to go through. I reluctantly went with him as he brought me to a dreaded location that I never wanted to wind up in. The Sentinel dungeons were not as terrifying as I had been told from Orphan Stories, but they were not a pretty sight to behold. Dimly lit with torches, it had an eerie quiet to it. We passed by some cells, some empty, and the others had a prisoner or two. Some of the prisoners would glance in my direction, but most wouldn't even flinch. I didn't want to spend another minute in this place, and much less receive a sentence from being framed. Stop! It really wasn't me. I don't have any of your money. I tried to reason with the man again, trying to get him to slow down so I wouldn't have to argue with both him and the guards who didn't take too kindly to orphans that lurked around the Sentinel maze. The Vin stopped and looked me up and down. He let go of my arm, not hesitating to give me a warning glance as he did so. He patted me down and seemed displeased at the results. As I thought. There were two of you, he murmured. What? I yelped, and I noticed I was being stared down by the other prisoners. Silently watched. I'm telling you, it was a Madrasian. I don't want to be here for something I didn't do. The military here hates orphans. Perhaps for good reason. You look like an infestation. He scowled at me, but didn't make any move to continue towards the bounty master's office. You sad thing. He sighed, and he gave me a pitying look. I'm baffled I still have the patience for you, despite your clever little stories. But I'll give you an option, little girl. He crouched down to get on eye level with me. You can either deal with whatever these guards have in store for thieves, or... He trailed on. A wicked smile began to form on his lips. Vind nobility have always been trailed by loyal fishermen servants. Such a delicate privilege that the wealthy get to indulge in. But I suppose you will be suitable. Tell me, what is your name, girl? I'm Lot. Well, Lot, my name is Naktari. What will your choice be? Become an assistant to me? Or I'll leave you to Sentinel's justice. Naktari stood up as he watched me warily. He was clearly amused at this little idea of his. Fine, I'll go with you, Naktari. I was hesitant to choose. I had heard horror stories about people who came here to take advantage of orphans. But so long as I wasn't chained to him, so long as we got to a new area, I could book it. He turned and began to walk towards the stairs of the dungeon. I shrugged. I suppose I had to follow him now. I guess we'll deal with our escape when we get there. This concludes Chapter 1. Thank you for listening.